Why can't you stop thinking about someone, even when you know you should? Why does your mind keep going back again and again? You call it love, you call it connection, but what if I told you it's neither? It's not love, it's not weakness, it's a trap your own brain created. Why does one face, one voice, one presence stay in your mind long after the screen goes dark? You open your phone for a minute, just a minute, and somehow it turns into an hour. You tell yourself it's harmless, it's just admiration, it's just entertainment. But if it's so harmless, then why does it feel so powerful? There's a strange pull you can't fully explain, a quiet urge to check again, to search again, to replay that same moment one more time. And every time you do, there's a small rush, a warmth, a spark, almost like your brain is being rewarded. And then, when you try to stop, there's discomfort, restlessness, a subtle emptiness. You might have even asked yourself, what is wrong with me? Why can't I focus like I used to? Why do I feel so emotionally attached to someone who doesn't even know I exist? Pause for a second. Nothing is wrong with you. You are not weak, you are not dramatic, and you are definitely not losing your mind. What you are experiencing is something deeply human, something biological, something your brain has been designed to chase without asking for your permission. But here's the part no one tells you. You are not addicted to a person. You are attached to a feeling of excitement, a feeling of connection, a feeling that makes your ordinary day feel a little less empty. And once your brain tastes that feeling, it wants more. Not because you are desperate, not because you are foolish, but because your brain is wired to repeat what feels rewarding. The real question is not, why am I obsessed? The real question is, what is my brain trying to give me through this? Today, we are not going to shame this feeling, we are not going to suppress it, and we are definitely not going to pretend it doesn't exist. We are going to understand it, because control doesn't begin with force, it begins with awareness. And once you truly understand what is happening inside your mind, you will realize something powerful. You were never out of control, you were simply unaware. And awareness changes everything. A few minutes ago, I asked you something important. If this isn't weakness, then what is it? To answer that, we need to understand something simple but powerful. Not complicated neuroscience, not medical definitions, just a quiet process that happens inside your brain every single day. Your brain has a reward system. Think of it as an internal guidance system. Its job is to push you toward things that feel important, exciting, or meaningful. Thousands of years ago, this system helped humans survive. It rewarded food, connection, achievement, discovery. It encouraged repetition of whatever increased chances of survival. And the chemical that plays a big role in this system is called dopamine. But here is something most people misunderstand. Dopamine is not happiness. It is not love. It is not attachment. Dopamine is anticipation. It is the feeling of, I want that again. It is the signal that says, this matters, pay attention. Imagine this. You wake up in the morning. Your phone is next to your bed. Before your mind is fully awake, your hand reaches for it almost automatically. You open an app. You search a name. You see a new clip. And in that tiny moment when you realize there is something new to watch, your brain lights up. That tiny spark of excitement, that is dopamine.
It is not the entire video that creates the strongest pull. It is the expectation of what you are about to see, the possibility, the anticipation. Your brain loves anticipation more than possession. That is why sometimes the moment before watching feels more intense than the watching itself. And this is where it becomes powerful. Every time you see something emotionally intense, a romantic scene, a soft smile, perfect chemistry, dramatic music, beautiful visuals, your brain doesn't just enjoy it, it marks it. It says, "This feels significant," and it stores that association.
The next time you feel slightly bored, slightly lonely, slightly unmotivated, your brain remembers. It whispers, "Go back to that. That felt good." Not because you are weak, because your brain is efficient. It remembers what produced a strong emotional response and pushes you toward it again. Now, let's talk about something else your brain loves: novelty. New clips, new edits, new interviews. Even if it is the same person, the content feels slightly different every time. And novelty increases dopamine release even more. Your brain is wired to chase what is slightly unpredictable. This is the same reason social media scrolling feels endless. You never know what the next swipe will bring. That unpredictability keeps the reward system active. Now add emotion to unpredictability. Add romance, add beauty, add music, add longing. That combination is extremely powerful. And here is where fantasy becomes stronger than reality. Real life is slow. Real life has awkward pauses, imperfections, responsibilities, unfinished tasks. Real life does not come with background music or perfect lighting. But what you watch on a screen is curated. It is edited. It is emotionally intensified. Every glance is magnified. Every smile is meaningful. Every moment is compressed into something cinematic. Your brain responds to intensity, not realism.
So, when you compare the emotional intensity of fantasy to the quiet rhythm of your daily life, fantasy wins. Not because it is better, but because it is louder. And your reward system reacts more strongly to loud emotional signals. Now, imagine this pattern repeating. You feel slightly bored. You open your phone. You watch something emotionally intense. You feel a small rush. Your brain records the reward. The next day, the same thing happens, and the next, and the next. Slowly, without realizing it, your brain builds a connection. This person equals emotional reward. And once that association becomes strong, it starts operating automatically. You are no longer consciously deciding every time. Your brain begins deciding for you. This is why when you try to stop, you feel discomfort, a restlessness, a sense that something is missing. Not because you're in love, not because you're dramatic, but because your brain expected a reward and did not receive it. It is the same mechanism behind many habits. The brain predicts reward. When reward does not arrive, it creates craving. Craving is not romance. Craving is chemistry. And the more frequently the cycle repeats, the stronger the neural pathway becomes. Neurons that fire together, wire together. In simple words, the more you pair one person with emotional excitement, the more automatic the pull becomes. And this is the moment where awareness changes everything. Because when you understand that the intensity you feel is partly biological, you stop attacking yourself. You stop saying, "Why am I like this?"
Instead, you begin asking, how can I redirect this system? Because dopamine is not your enemy. It is powerful fuel. The problem is that your brain seeks reward. The problem is where it has learned to find it. And once you realize that, you are no longer powerless. You are simply early in understanding.
By now, you understand that dopamine creates anticipation, but anticipation alone does not create obsession. What turns a simple interest into something that feels uncontrollable is repetition, not intensity, not love, repetition. Obsession is not born in one dramatic moment. It forms quietly in small daily cycles that feel harmless at first. It usually begins with something simple: boredom, loneliness, stress, or emotional discomfort. Nothing extreme, just a slightly empty moment in the day. You reach for your phone almost automatically, not because you plan to, not because you made it a conscious decision, but because your brain has learned that something inside that screen can change how you feel. You open the app, you search the name, you see a new clip, and before you even press play, there is already a small emotional lift. That is anticipation activating the reward system. Then the video starts. Music, a smile, a close-up, a romantic edit, a perfect moment compressed into a few seconds of emotional intensity. You feel warmth, a subtle rush. Maybe your mind begins imagining scenarios. Maybe you replay a moment. Maybe you watch another clip and another. For a while, reality fades slightly into the background. Whatever stress you were carrying feels lighter. Whatever emptiness you felt becomes quieter. There is relief. And this is where the loop strengthens. Your brain does not analyze whether this is healthy or productive. It simply records patterns. It notices that when you felt low, you watched something and your mood improved. That connection becomes stored. Low mood plus screen equals relief. The next time you feel bored or restless, your brain does not need to think very hard. It suggests the shortcut again. It nudges you toward the same source of reward, and because it worked before, you follow it. At first, it feels voluntary. You tell yourself, just 5 minutes, and maybe the first few times it really is just 5 minutes. But slowly, the cycle becomes automatic. Here is something important. Familiarity creates emotional weight.
The more often you see the same face during emotionally charged moments, the more significant that face begins to feel. Your brain starts associating that person with comfort, excitement, and relief. Not because you truly know them, not because there's a real connection, but because they appear during dopamine spikes. Over time, repetition can mimic attachment. Your brain does not clearly distinguish between repeated emotional stimulation and meaningful emotional bonding. It simply registers frequency and intensity. If a certain face appears again and again during moments of emotional reward, it starts feeling important. This is where the illusion deepens. You may begin to think about them randomly during the day. Their image may pop into your mind when you feel bored. You might compare real-life people to the version you see on screen, and slowly, reality starts feeling less stimulating. Not because reality is bad, but because it is not edited. Real life has pauses, imperfections, awkwardness, silence. It unfolds slowly. It does not come with background music or dramatic lighting. It does not compress emotion into perfect, intense highlights. Fantasy, on the other hand, delivers concentrated emotional moments. Every clip is curated. Every second is designed to evoke something strong. Your brain reacts more to intensity than authenticity.
And because your brain adapts quickly, something else begins happening. The same level of content no longer produces the same emotional rush, so you search for slightly more. Longer edits, more dramatic scenes, more emotionally powerful moments. This is called escalation. It is subtle, and most people never notice it happening. Time stretches. 5 minutes becomes 20. 20 becomes an hour. You tell yourself you are in control, and technically you are still choosing to press play, but the impulse is no longer neutral. It is conditioned. Here is a difficult question to sit with. If you suddenly couldn't access that content anymore, would you feel restless, irritated, empty? Would your mind replay the same images automatically? If the answer is yes, that's not love. That's a trained reward loop. The brain predicted stimulation. When it doesn't receive the expected reward, it creates craving. Craving feels intense. It feels personal. But at its core, it's a neurological prediction error. The system expected dopamine, and it did not arrive.
And this is not something to feel ashamed of, because the same brain that learned this pattern can unlearn it. Neurons that fire together wire together, but they can also unwire when the firing pattern changes. The loop was built through repetition. It can be weakened through new repetition. The most powerful shift happens when you stop saying, "Why am I like this?" and start saying, "Oh, this is a loop." The moment you can observe the pattern instead of being carried by it, something changes. There is a small gap between impulse and action, and inside that gap is freedom. Not instant freedom, not dramatic transformation, but the beginning of control that is real, not imagined. And now we move deeper, because this loop does not grow strongest when life feels full and purposeful. It grows strongest when you feel something inside you feels empty. There is something important you need to understand. This loop does not become powerful when your life feels full. It becomes powerful when something inside you feels empty. Most people think obsession starts because someone is too attractive, too charming, or too perfect, but that is rarely the real reason. The real reason usually begins quieter. It begins in moments where you feel uncertain about your direction, when your days feel repetitive, when your goals feel blurry, when you are physically present in your life but emotionally disconnected from it. When you do not feel deeply engaged with your own story, your mind looks for a story that feels alive, and fantasy provides that instantly. If your daily routine feels monotonous, emotionally flat, or unexciting, the contrast becomes dramatic. On one side, real life, slow, ordinary, demanding. On the other side, a world of curated intensity, romance, chemistry, beauty, emotional highs compressed into minutes. Your brain does not compare realism, it compares stimulation. If your inner world feels understimulated, anything that provides emotional intensity will feel magnetic. There is also something deeper happening. When you feel uncertain about yourself, your identity, your worth, your direction, your mind naturally seeks something stable to attach to. A consistent face, a familiar presence, a predictable source of emotional reward. It creates a sense of structure, even if it is artificial, even if it is one-sided, because uncertainty is uncomfortable, and attachment, even imagined attachment, reduces uncertainty. Think about the times the urge feels strongest. Is it when you are deeply focused on a meaningful project? Or is it when you are procrastinating? Is it when you are surrounded by people who make you feel seen? Or is it when you are alone in your room, scrolling in silence? The urge often intensifies when your own life feels paused. Fantasy fills that pause. There is another subtle layer. When you watch emotionally intense content repeatedly, you are not just consuming it, you are borrowing emotion. You are temporarily stepping into a world where feelings are amplified and clear, where romantic tension resolves beautifully, where every glance carries meaning. In real life, emotions are messy, they are uncertain. Conversations do not follow scripts, outcomes are unpredictable. Fantasy removes unpredictability, it offers emotional certainty. And when your real life feels directionless or slow, certainty feels comforting. Over time, something dangerous begins to happen. Instead of building intensity inside your own life, you start outsourcing it. Instead of asking, how can I make my days more meaningful? Your brain quietly chooses the easier option. Let me experience meaning through someone else. That shift is subtle, but powerful. Because the more you rely on external fantasy for emotional stimulation, the less motivated you become to create stimulation in your own world. Why pursue challenging goals when a 2-minute clip can give you a faster emotional hit? Why risk rejection in real relationships when imagination feels safer? Why sit with boredom long enough to discover something new about yourself when distraction is instantly available? This is not laziness, it is efficiency.
Your brain is wired to conserve energy and seek maximum reward for minimum effort. Fantasy often wins that calculation. But here is the cost. When you repeatedly escape into curated emotional highs, your tolerance for ordinary life decreases. Silence feels heavier. Routine feels duller. Real people feel less exciting. Not because they are lacking, but because your reward system has been calibrated to heightened stimulation. This is why obsession can feel strongest during transitional periods, after a breakup, during career uncertainty, during loneliness, during academic stress, during phases where identity feels unstable. In those moments, your inner foundation feels shaky. Fantasy feels solid. It becomes something you can return to, something consistent, something predictable. And predictability feels safe. But safety is not the same as growth. There is a hard truth here. Sometimes what feels like deep attraction is actually emotional displacement. Sometimes what feels like longing is actually avoidance. Sometimes what feels like love is actually a substitute for direction. That does not make you broken. It makes you human. When life feels overwhelming or unclear, the mind naturally looks for something beautiful to hold on to.
The problem begins when that holding turns into hiding. When you start using fantasy not as entertainment, but as emotional anesthesia. When it becomes the place you go instead of the life you build. And here is the most important realization of this entire section. The intensity you feel toward that person might not actually be about them. It might be about what they represent: excitement, certainty, romance, purpose, escape. If you could create those feelings inside your own life, the magnetic pole would weaken naturally, because obsession thrives in emotional emptiness, but it struggles in a life that feels meaningful. So the real question is not, how do I stop thinking about them?
The deeper question is, what is missing in my life that makes this feel so powerful? That is where transformation begins. And in the next section, we are going to talk about something uncomfortable. What happens if this loop continues? Because every habit has a direction, and every direction leads somewhere. Let's look at where this one leads.
Every habit has a direction, even the small ones, especially the small ones. When something becomes part of your daily emotional regulation, it does not stay neutral. It either strengthens your ability to live fully, or it slowly replaces parts of your real experience. The danger of this loop is not that you enjoy watching someone. The danger is what it quietly starts changing inside you. At first, nothing seems wrong. You still go to work, you still study, you still talk to people. From the outside, your life looks normal, but internally, something shifts. Your baseline for stimulation begins to rise. Ordinary conversations feel less engaging. Silence feels heavier. Real interactions feel slower than the fast, emotionally charged clips your brain has grown used to. You might start comparing real people to the edited versions you see on screen, not consciously, not intentionally, but subtly. Real life does not deliver perfectly timed smiles. It does not provide background music during meaningful moments. It does not cut away awkward pauses. So real connection starts feeling underwhelming. And that is where dissatisfaction begins. Not because your life is bad, but because your reward system has been trained to expect intensity. Over time, motivation can also weaken. Why? Because dopamine is not only involved in pleasure, it's involved in drive. When your brain gets frequent, easy dopamine from fantasy, it becomes less willing to work for slower rewards. Long-term goals require effort. They require discomfort. They require patience before the emotional payoff arrives. Fantasy delivers immediate stimulation without effort. The more your brain gets used to instant emotional reward, the harder it becomes to tolerate delayed gratification. You may notice procrastination increasing. You may feel less excited about projects that once mattered. You may sit down to focus and within minutes feel the urge to check your phone. It is not because you lost discipline. It is because your brain has been trained to prefer quick spikes over slow growth. There is another consequence that is even subtler: emotional avoidance. If every time you feel lonely, anxious, insecure, or bored, you immediately escape into fantasy, you never actually sit with those emotions long enough to understand them. You never ask, why am I feeling this way? You simply soothe the discomfort. In the short term, that feels like relief. In the long term, it prevents emotional maturity. Growth often happens in the moments we do not distract ourselves, in the quiet discomfort, in the unanswered questions, in the boredom that forces creativity. But if boredom is constantly numbed, creativity weakens. If loneliness is constantly escaped, real connection feels more intimidating. If uncertainty is constantly avoided, confidence never develops. Slowly, the world inside your phone becomes more emotionally vivid than the world outside it. And that's the tipping point. Because once your inner life becomes more attached to fantasy than reality, presence suffers. You may find yourself physically somewhere, but mentally somewhere else. You may talk to someone while part of your mind drifts back to familiar images. You may try to focus on a task, but your brain keeps suggesting the shortcut it knows so well. This is not catastrophic. It is gradual. And gradual shifts are the hardest to notice. there is also the risk of identity distortion. When you consume highly curated romantic or idealized content repeatedly, your expectations shift without you realizing it. You begin to expect emotional intensity as the standard. You may start believing that real connection should always feel dramatic, cinematic, overwhelming. But real connection is often quiet, stable, slow, built through shared effort, not edited moments. If your brain has been trained to chase intensity, stability can feel boring. And when stability feels boring, long-term relationships become harder to sustain. That is how a simple habit can quietly influence future choices, not because it is evil, but because it reshapes what feels rewarded. Now pause for a moment. Imagine continuing this pattern for 5 years. Nothing extreme, just daily small escapes, daily reinforcement of the same loop. Where would your focus be? Where would your emotional energy be invested? Would your real life feel more vivid or less? This is not meant to scare you. It is meant to clarify direction.
Because here is the truth. If a pattern can slowly move you away from presence, it can also slowly move you back. Nothing here is permanent. Your brain is adaptive. It learned this loop. It can learn a different one. But change does not begin with force. It begins with awareness, followed by intentional redirection. And that is exactly what we are going to talk about next. Not suppression, not guilt, not deleting everything in a dramatic moment, but rewiring. Because the same dopamine system that pulled you into this loop can be trained to work for you instead of against you. Let's talk about how. Now that you understand the loop, something inside you should feel different. Not ashamed, aware. And awareness is powerful, because you cannot change what you cannot see. But here is something very important. You cannot fight dopamine with willpower alone. If you try to simply force yourself to stop, your brain will resist. It will feel deprived. It will increase craving. The urge may even grow stronger. Why? Because you are removing a reward without replacing it, and the brain hates empty space. So, instead of thinking, how do I stop? The better question is, how do I redirect? The first step is not quitting. It is creating space between impulse and action. The next time you feel the urge, do not immediately obey it, but also do not panic. Just pause. Even 30 seconds. In that pause, ask yourself one calm question. What am I actually feeling right now? Not what you want to watch, what you are feeling. Is it boredom? Loneliness? Stress? Avoidance? Restlessness? The urge is often a surface signal. Underneath is an emotion asking for attention. Most people never look underneath. They only treat the urge. But if you start identifying the real emotion, something shifts. You begin responding instead of reacting. Now comes the second step. You must give your brain alternative rewards. Remember, dopamine is not evil. It is fuel. It drives motivation. It pushes you toward goals. So the goal is not to eliminate dopamine. It is to earn it differently. Physical movement is powerful. Even a short walk changes your chemistry.
Exercise releases dopamine in a healthier, more regulated way. Creative effort works too. Writing, learning, building something. When you struggle through something slightly challenging and make progress, the dopamine release is slower but more stable. Human connection is even stronger. Real conversation, eye contact, shared laughter. These produce a combination of dopamine and other bonding chemicals that fantasy cannot replicate. But here is the catch. At first, these alternatives will feel weaker because your brain is calibrated to high-intensity stimulation. It's like lowering the brightness after staring at a very bright screen. Everything feels dim at first, but if you give it time, your baseline adjusts. This is called recalibration. When you reduce artificial spikes, your brain becomes sensitive again to normal levels of reward. Silence becomes tolerable. Simple moments feel richer. Conversations feel more engaging. Focus improves. But recalibration requires temporary discomfort. There may be restlessness, a slight emptiness, a feeling of something is missing. That feeling is not proof that you need the habit. It's proof that your brain is adjusting.
Think of it like muscle soreness after starting exercise. Uncomfortable, but a sign of adaptation. There is also something deeper you must do. You must build something in your real life that feels meaningful. Because obsession loses power when your own story becomes compelling. Ask yourself honestly, what goal have I been postponing? What skill have I wanted to develop? What part of my life feels stagnant? The energy you are investing in fantasy is not small. It is attention. It is imagination. It is emotional intensity. Imagine redirecting that same energy into building something real, a stronger body, a sharper mind, a creative project, a career path, a real relationship. When your days begin to contain progress, your brain finds new sources of reward, and slowly the old loop weakens. There is one more important shift. Do not demonize the person you are watching. Do not turn this into hatred or extreme rejection. That creates emotional tension, which, ironically, keeps the loop alive. Instead, neutralize it.
See it for what it is. Content, entertainment, a stimulus. Not destiny, not love, not something missing from your life. Just a stimulus that your brain overlearned. And the moment you reduce emotional drama around it, the grip softens. This process is not instant. There may be days you slip back. That does not erase progress. Rewiring is gradual. Every time you pause instead of immediately reacting, you weaken the pathway. Every time you choose a healthier reward, you strengthen a new one. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you grow. And slowly, something beautiful happens. You start feeling present again. Your mind becomes quieter. Your focus sharpens. Real interactions feel more meaningful. You no longer feel pulled. You feel steady. That steadiness is not boring. It is powerful.
Because now, your dopamine system is not controlling you. You are directing it. And when you can direct your own reward system, you are no longer trapped by loops. You are building momentum. Now, let's close this properly. Not with fear, not with intensity, but with clarity. At the beginning of this journey, you asked a simple but honest question. Why can't I stop? Now, you understand that the answer was never weakness.
It was never about lacking discipline or being emotionally fragile. It was about wiring. It was about a brain doing exactly what it was designed to do: seek reward, avoid discomfort, and repeat what feels relieving. You were not broken, you were conditioned, and conditioning can be changed. The most powerful shift that happens now is subtle, but life-altering. You stop seeing yourself as someone who is obsessed, and you start seeing yourself as someone who became aware. Awareness changes everything. Before, the urge felt mysterious and personal. It felt emotional, almost romantic, as if something deep inside you was pulling toward meaning. But now you can see it clearly. It is a loop. It is a trained response. And once something has a name, it becomes manageable. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are understanding yourself. There is a profound difference between those two states. When you fight yourself, you create tension and inner conflict. When you understand yourself, you create space. And in that space, choice appears. From now on, you may still experience moments of boredom, loneliness, restlessness, or automatic impulses. Your hand may still reach for your phone without conscious thought, but now there will be a pause, even if it is brief. And inside that pause, you will recognize what is happening. You will realize that this is simply your brain predicting a familiar reward. That realization weakens the intensity of the urge, not because the desire disappears instantly, but because you are no longer fully identified with it. You are observing it, and the observer is always more powerful than the impulse. Over time, as you redirect your attention toward building real experiences, toward effort, learning, movement, connection, and progress, your emotional system recalibrates. The intensity you once borrowed from a screen begins to grow naturally inside your own life.
You begin to feel satisfaction from completing tasks. You feel grounded in routines that once seemed boring. Conversations feel more present. Focus becomes steadier. And then, one day, without drama or force, you notice something surprising. The face that once occupied your mind constantly no longer appears with the same intensity. The urge that once felt urgent now feels optional. The loop that once seemed powerful feels distant, not because you suppressed it, but because you replaced it with something stronger, your own direction. This is the real transformation. It is not about deleting an app or making a dramatic promise to yourself. It is about shifting your source of reward. It is about upgrading your relationship with your own brain. The same dopamine system that once pulled you into fantasy can fuel discipline, creativity, ambition, and real connection. The chemistry does not change. The direction does. So the next time you feel the pull, do not respond with guilt or frustration. Recognize it calmly. Understand that your brain is simply repeating what it has learned, and then gently guide it somewhere better. That is maturity. That is growth. That is freedom. Not the absence of desire, but the ability to direct it. You were never meant to live inside someone else's highlight reel. You were meant to build your own story, one intentional choice at a time. And now that you understand how your mind works, you are no longer at its mercy. You are capable of shaping it, slowly, patiently, deliberately. That is where real power begins. There is one final layer that most people avoid, and it is not about dopamine, fantasy, or even habits. It is about your relationship with yourself when there is nothing distracting you. When the screen is off, when the room is quiet, when no one is texting you, when nothing is stimulating your mind. What happens in that silence? For many people, silence feels uncomfortable.
Thoughts become louder, questions appear, doubts surface. You may start thinking about your future, your past mistakes, things you haven't achieved yet, conversations that didn't go well, opportunities you missed. Without distraction, your inner world becomes visible, and that visibility can feel overwhelming. So the brain searches for something to soften it. That is where distraction becomes attractive. But here's something important to understand. Discomfort is not danger.
Silence is not emptiness. Boredom is not failure. In fact, boredom is often the doorway to creativity. When your brain is not overstimulated, it begins to wander. It starts connecting ideas. It begins imagining possibilities. Some of your most original thoughts can only appear when there is no external noise. But if every quiet moment is immediately filled with scrolling, your mind never gets the chance to expand. You stay reactive instead of reflective. There is a powerful exercise that sounds simple but changes everything. Sit without stimulation for 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no talking, just you and your thoughts. At first, it may feel restless. Your mind may try to escape. You may feel the urge to reach for something familiar. That urge is the same loop trying to protect you from stillness. But if you stay, something shifts. The intensity of the urge rises and then falls. Thoughts come and then pass. Emotions surface and then settle. You begin to realize that you can experience discomfort without escaping it. And that realization builds confidence. Because if you can sit with yourself, you no longer need constant external intensity to feel alive. You become internally stable. That stability is quiet. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like a rush. It feels grounded. And grounded people are difficult to control by algorithms, by habits, by impulses. When you develop the ability to be alone with your thoughts, your emotional dependence on fantasy decreases naturally, not because you forced it away, but because you no longer need it as emotional support. You start becoming curious about your own mind instead of trying to silence it.
You ask deeper questions. What kind of life would actually excite me in reality? What am I avoiding? What would make my days feel meaningful without needing constant stimulation? These questions are uncomfortable at first, but they are powerful, because obsession fades when purpose grows. Distraction weakens when direction strengthens, and fantasy loses its grip when reality becomes engaging. This is the final shift, not just breaking a loop, but building a stronger self. A self that can sit in silence. A self that can tolerate boredom. A self that can feel emotions fully without immediately numbing them. That is emotional maturity. And once you reach that place, something beautiful happens. You stop chasing intensity. You start building depth. And depth is far more satisfying than intensity ever was. There is a quiet truth about human behavior that most people never realize. We do not act according to what we want. We act according to who we believe we are. If somewhere inside you believe, I am someone who gets easily attached, or I don't have strong control, or I always fall into these loops, your behavior will unconsciously try to stay consistent with that identity.
The brain loves consistency. Even if the identity is limiting, it feels familiar, and familiarity feels safe.
So real change does not begin with forcing different actions. It begins with shifting self-perception. Instead of saying, "I am trying to stop obsessing," something deeper must happen. You begin saying, "I am someone who understands my mind." That sentence carries strength. It carries awareness. It carries maturity. When you see yourself as aware, your actions naturally follow that identity. There is a subtle but powerful difference between resisting an urge and outgrowing it. Resistance feels tense. Outgrowing feels calm. When a child outgrows a toy, they do not fight the toy. They simply lose interest because something else feels more meaningful. That is the level of change you are building. Not suppression, expansion. As you start investing energy into your real life, into skills, health, relationships, purpose, and self-respect, your identity begins shifting quietly. You stop seeing yourself as someone chasing stimulation. You start seeing yourself as someone building momentum. Momentum changes everything. When your days contain small wins, waking up on time, completing tasks, improving physically, learning something new, your brain begins associating reward with growth instead of escape. And once growth becomes rewarding, fantasy loses its dominance. You also begin protecting your focus differently. Not because someone told you to, but because it feels aligned with who you are becoming. You think, does this help the person I am building? That single question creates powerful boundaries. Notice something important. This transformation is not loud. It does not require dramatic declarations or deleting everything in one emotional moment. It is quiet, consistent, almost invisible in the beginning. But identity shifts compound over time.
Every time you choose presence over distraction, you reinforce the identity of someone disciplined. Every time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you reinforce emotional strength. Every time you build something real instead of consuming something artificial, you reinforce self-respect. Eventually, the old version of you, the one constantly pulled by loops, feels distant. Not because you hated that version, but because you evolved beyond it. There is a calm confidence that comes from mastering your own impulses. It is not about perfection. It is about direction. You realize that attraction is natural, dopamine is natural, fantasy is natural, but being controlled by them is optional. And when you reach that understanding, something shifts permanently. You stop asking, "Why can't I stop?" You start saying, "I choose better." Not aggressively, not emotionally, just steadily. Because now you know how your brain works. And when knowledge meets intention, identity transforms. You are no longer the person caught in a loop. You are the person who recognized the loop and rewired it. That is growth. And growth is far more powerful than obsession ever was. Imagine yourself 1 year from now, not dramatically different, not unrealistically transformed, just steadier, clearer, more grounded. You wake up in the morning, and the first thing you notice is not an urge, not a face in your mind, not the impulse to reach for your phone. You notice calm. The phone is still there. The world is still the same, but something inside you has changed. There is space between waking up and reacting. That small space feels ordinary, yet it quietly reshapes your entire day.
You move through your morning without rushing to fill silence. Your thoughts feel organized rather than scattered. When boredom appears, it does not feel threatening.
When your mind drifts, it gently returns. You are not fighting yourself anymore. You are not negotiating with urges. There is a steadiness that feels natural, not forced. Now imagine meeting this future version of yourself. They look at you with understanding, not judgment. They remember exactly how it felt to be mentally pulled towards something again and again. They remember the late nights, the promise of just one more video, the way certain images replayed in the mind without invitation. They remember the frustration of wanting control but feeling subtly controlled. But something shifted for them. They did not become emotionless. They did not suddenly lose attraction or curiosity. What changed was their relationship with escape. They stopped running from their own inner discomfort. When loneliness appeared, they noticed it. When boredom surfaced, they allowed it. When uncertainty about the future crept in, they faced it instead of covering it with stimulation. The first weeks were not dramatic. There were moments of restlessness. There were evenings when silence felt loud. There were times when the old impulse returned strongly. But instead of reacting automatically, they paused. And in that pause, they asked a simple question: what am I actually feeling right now? That question became the turning point. Slowly, they began redirecting their energy, not in extreme ways, not with unrealistic discipline, just small, consistent shifts. A walk instead of scrolling, a focused hour of work instead of drifting online, a real conversation instead of imagined ones. Those choices felt small at first, almost insignificant, but over time they built something powerful: self-trust. Self-trust grows when you keep small promises to yourself, when you say you will pause before reacting and you actually pause, when you say you will focus for 30 minutes and you follow through, when you decide to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Each small kept promise strengthens identity, and identity shapes behavior far more deeply than motivation ever could. Gradually, the emotional intensity that once felt dependent on a screen began emerging naturally from real life. Progress started feeling rewarding. Physical movement created real chemical balance. Real interactions carried depth that fantasy could never fully replicate. The face that once dominated mental space slowly became neutral, not negative, not hated, just ordinary. Without constant emotional reinforcement, the neural pathway weakened. Without daily pairing of image and reward, the intensity faded. What replaced it was direction. When life has direction, distraction loses its dominance. When your days contain effort and meaning, escape becomes less attractive. When you feel engaged in your own growth, borrowed intensity stops feeling necessary. The future version of you understands something deeply. You were never obsessed with a person. You were understimulated in your own life.
That realization changes everything. The solution was never to eliminate dopamine. It was to earn it differently. It was to allow your brain to associate reward with growth instead of escape. And once that shift happened, everything recalibrated. Silence became peaceful instead of uncomfortable. Routine became grounding instead of dull. Real connection became richer than edited perfection. Now return to the present moment. Nothing magical has happened yet. Your habits will not disappear overnight, but something inside you is clearer.
You understand the mechanism. You understand the loop. You understand that what felt overpowering was a trained response, not destiny. You are not fighting your brain anymore. You are guiding it. Each time you pause instead of react, you strengthen control. Each time you choose real effort over instant stimulation, you reinforce a new pathway. Each time you sit with your own thoughts without escaping, you build emotional resilience. Freedom is not the absence of desire, it is the ability to direct it. Your attention is powerful, your focus is valuable, and your life becomes shaped by where you repeatedly place both. This was never truly about someone on a screen. It was about reclaiming your attention, your direction, and your inner stability. And that process begins quietly, one pause at a time, one conscious choice at a time, one moment of awareness at a time. You are not powerless. You are adaptable. And once you understand how your mind works, you stop being controlled by it. You begin shaping it deliberately. That is not dramatic. It is steady. And steady change is the kind that lasts.